Hey guys, Andrew here. So last time I came out, I wanted to do a Star Trail with the D5000. I forgot the battery. It happens. You got to check your gear. So tonight I am going to do one, and I'm going to take the time in this video to really explain what I'm doing, nuts and bolts. Last video was sort of more of an overview. This one is going to be an actual step by step. So hopefully I'll fill in everything. If I didn't, ask in the comments and I'll fill it in. So let's start. Gear. D5000. 18 to 55 kit lens, not a fast lens, f3.5 to f5.6 depending on your zoom, so not fast, not low light. Camera's not low light either, just a common camera. This is 7 years old, 6 years old. Simple remote for the camera. There's plug for the D5000, just a button, no computer there. This is something I've added for my intervolometer, which I'm not using tonight. It just lets me connect to an intervolometer so I can use this plug without losing the button functionality. The key thing about this button is, so I can press the button manually, but I can also lock it down by sliding this little thing forward, and it stays locked down. I can release it, and that's going to be key to what we're doing tonight. Okay, the other thing I've got, sturdy tripod. This is a pretty nice tripod, I'm not going to lie. Gitso carbon fiber. You don't have to have the tripod that nice. Just about anything will work, especially if it's calm. If it's windy, you're going to want something pretty sturdy, or the camera's going to move around. But use what you got for now. As you've done this a little bit, if you have trouble with things being blurry, moving around during the exposures, it's time for a better tripod. But start with what you got. So now, before I go to set my camera up for the actual shot, I'm going to put the camera in the correct mode. I'm going to put it at M, manual. And then I know I'm going to be shooting at my widest zoom, which on this lens is 18 millimeters. And then I want to adjust my aperture to near its widest, fastest, biggest size. And on this lens, that's f3.5. I'm going to go to f4. Because that at 18 millimeters gives me a very deep depth of field, so focus will be easier. Okay, so here we are. I've got the shot framed. The way I did that was, since I'm shooting by myself, it was hard to film and do that at the same time. I put the tripod about where I thought it should be. I set my ISO to my absolute highest ISO the camera will go. I'm not worried about quality at this point. All I'm doing is guessing and checking. Zoom all the way out. Set my aperture to f4, which is what I said earlier. Set my exposure time to, what did I do this time? 1 second. And I take an exposure. Okay. Then I look at that exposure. So there is, let's see if I can make this work. You can see that. So there is my framing. Got a front end loader here, flat horizon, sky. Not a very complicated composition, but there it is. Okay. So the other thing you can do then is you can zoom in and you can check your focus. Now bear in mind that we're at our highest ISO, so things are going to be a little bit soft. That looks pretty close. I've got the camera on manual focus, and I went to Infinity, which is at one end of the other focus scale, and then I came back just a little bit, is usually a good starting point. So once you've done that, now we're going to actually take a real test shot, so to speak. So what we do there is we change our ISO, however you do that on your camera. My camera, it's on the back of the screen menu. And I'm going to go to 1600 again. And we change our exposure time to 30 seconds in this case. Okay, it's going to get dark for a second, and then we take a picture. And I'm going to light paint a little bit on the front end loader so that I can have a little light to see if it's in focus. And I just do that using my headlamp. Now we wait. So now, look over here, we check it. Now looking at that, I zoom in, I look at my subject, which is the front end loader. And it is, I'm not going to say tack sharp, I'm just going to give it a little tweak. Okay. One more time. Turn this this light back on so you can see me again. So focusing at night is probably the single hardest thing to do, especially with a crop frame camera like this. There's lots of tricks. I'm not really using many of them tonight. The primary one I use is I'll go put a headlamp right in front of the subject and then use autofocus. And with the headlamp on the subject, if you can get to it if it's close, there's enough contrast for autofocus, usually enough light for autofocus to work. If all else fails, guess and check like I just did on a wide angle lens. Its focus is not super critical because your depth of field is so high, especially somewhere like f4 or f8. We're at f4 tonight. So the other thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at my histogram. I don't know if you can see that histogram right there. It's going to go away, so I'm going to hit play again. So we're not all the way on the right, we're not all the way on the left. We've got lots of data right in the center, which means when we go with the raw file, we can pull that image out. We can increase contrast, and we can do that selectively across the image. So that's kind of the key. If that histogram looks wrong, there's a couple things you can do. You can change your exposure time, you can change your ISO, you can change your f-stop. All those things are possibilities. So the question is, why would you change one versus the other? Well, that's a little bit of a complicated question. Exposure time does not affect how bright the stars are. It only affects how bright the sky is in the foreground, because they have constant light on. So generally speaking, exposure time will make your background darker or brighter without changing your stars. Aperture and ISO will make everything brighter or dimmer. So if you want more contrast between the stars in the background, speed up your exposure. If you want less, your background's too dark, which happens sometimes because a completely black background is not enough, you can increase your exposure time up to the limit of your camera's manual settings, which is usually 30 seconds. So now I want to go ahead and start the time lapse. And this is where having a remote that works in a certain way works. So this button, I talked about it earlier, it's got a lock down. And we've got our camera in continuous mode like I talked about earlier. And what's going to happen is we're going to press this button and lock it, and it's going to take exposures back to back. So let me just let a couple of those go. Let me make sure I'm in the right mode. It's always good to check everything 4 or 5 times. Continuous release mode, good. And if everything works right, I'm going to turn this light off. Bear with me. So now if everything works right, here we go. So now we're going to wait about 30 seconds. Okay, so apparently I have a loose wire in my intervolometer, but I jiggled it, I played with it. You just heard it recycle. That's about the 3rd exposure. What we've got going on now is the camera is shooting in continuous mode. I'm going to take you back over to the truck so we can have a little light. But while we walk, I'm going to talk. So, continuous mode means that if we hold our finger down, it'll keep taking pictures. Normally used for things like sports. So what we're doing with it is we're using it for astrophotography, since we don't have an intervolometer to use. Now, what's going to happen is, as long as that remote is locked on, using that mechanical lock that's there, it'll keep trying to take pictures. Now, Nikon engineers were clever, and they decided they wanted to protect us from accidentally putting our camera in our bag with the shutter could be pressed, and it could just take pictures until the battery was dead or the card was full or the shutter broke. So they put an artificial limit in. On this camera, I think it's about 100 photos. On my D3S, it's 130. It's somewhere around there on every camera that Nikon has that I know of. So what generally happens is you have to go out there and release the shutter button and re-click it about once every 45 minutes is the timing I use. So the tool I use for that is a cell phone. I use a stopwatch on here. Countdown timer, 45 minutes. Start. So in 45 minutes, this is going to go beep, 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 and I'll run out here. and I'll release that button and relock it. Now, the trick on Nikons is that you don't have to wait for an exposure to end for that to be effective. It can be in the middle of a 30-second exposure. So what I do is I walk over there and I wait to hear the shutter cycle, click clack, and that means it just started another 30-second exposure. I will then release it and relock it. That resets the counter, but it doesn't break the star trail at all. The only real cost of that is that I have to babysit the camera for the entire star trail. I can't simply turn it on and then go sleep in my tent or my truck and then wake up the next morning and go retrieve it. A lot of people aren't really comfortable leaving a few $100 to a few $1,000s in camera gear unattended overnight. So it took me a while to get to the point where that was even useful. So what will happen now is, now I'm going to wait for this to count down. It's a little early. We've got 15 minutes left on my timer, but I started it a little late and I want to make sure I catch it before it stops. So we're going to go check the camera now. So you just heard it cycle. So now all I'm going to do is do this. Release the button. Repress it. Now we wait and make sure it recycles. There it went. So now we've got another 45 minutes. So I'm going to reset my timer when I get to the truck and let it go. Back in my office, I've downloaded everything into Capture One. Got all the raw files here. You can see some of my early test files. Playing with framing because it's hard to see through the viewfinder. In the end, I took about 330 photos that are going to be used, which is about 3.5 hours of star trail. You had to go back out once every 30 to 45 minutes and unlock and lock that button. So now what we're going to do is we're going to try to find the first photo that is really part of the star trail. These are all, the framing isn't changing. So there's ISO 6400. There's ISO 1600. So that's an actual star image, but there may be a gap. So there's a fairly large gap there in the stars if you watch them move back and forth. That's probably when I had a loose wire. So I'm going to guess the first real star trail image is right here. And I went ahead and flagged this one blue earlier when I was searching through. So these are unadjusted. We didn't talk about white balance. I shot on incandescent white balance because generally speaking, the night sky is going to be a little incandescent. If you make it daylight, most of the light in the sky is reflected light pollution, mercury vapor, etc. So incandescent's a good starting guess. You can play with it a little bit depending on what you want the sky to look like. There's times when I do something like this, white balance in the sky. I'm getting something not unlike incandescent white balance that way. We're not doing a processing tutorial, but I just wanted to give a real basic workflow, which is that I'm going to go through and I'm going to edit these files. It's super basic. So I took a typical file, which is actually this first file, and then in Capture One, Control-Shift-C will copy the settings, and I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-V, and that will apply the settings to all of the files, and you'll notice as I switch, the white balance has changed and the levels have changed, which is really the only thing I edited. Now, you'll also be noticing these end files are real hazy. So what happened there was it got cool and we got some condensation. There's a couple ways you can deal with that. The best one is just to leave them out. One of the advantages of a stacking star trail is that you have the option to include only the files you want. These files might be fine actually, because it just the haze just prevented stars from being visible, so there'll be shorter star trails in the center area, but these over here seem to be fine on the periphery where the fog didn't form on the lens. The other thing we'll have to deal with is what I call jokers. There's a joker. We were on the side of a road, car drives by, that's kind of cool. That, not so cool. So we're doing 30-second exposures, so that means we're going to lose about a minute of the star trail on these two. That'll create a little bit of a gap, but
not enormous. So let's scroll up here. Let me see if there's anything else I want to really be aware of. All of that's relatively far at the end. Okay, so pro tip, if you're in your truck nearby, don't step on your brakes. I must have tapped the brake on this one. There's a couple ways we can deal with that. We could leave it out. That's certainly the simplest. But alternatively, I could take this out into a pixel editor once I export it and just paint black over all of this bottom part, and then that red won't come through later on. I'll just get, because we're doing a light and only blend later, this will just disappear. And that, given that the rest of the frame is fine, that's probably what I'll do on that one. Just scroll through here super quick. Okay. So that file, this file might or might not be usable. The streaks are kind of cool, but it blew this out. What might happen is I might keep this and just paint this over with black so that this version of the loader doesn't come through. Like this one, for example, looks fine. Alternately, I can blend in just the loader part loader and foreground that I want later on. Okay, don't see. Just scroll real quick through all these. Lots of red. So definitely going to have to either go through and take these frames that have the red in them and pull them out of the set, or paint black over them, or in all likelihood, based on the way this star trail is looking, I'll probably just composite. Here's another one where a car drove through. I'll probably composite in one of the foreground frames that had the right amount of lighting on the loader in the foreground, because these are going to be problematic. So there's a foreground frame I might like. Nice red lines. Loader's got a little bit of light on it. Unlike the last time, the fence isn't completely blown out. Flag that one. Okay, so then we're up to the beginning. So I'm going to scroll, so I know what I'm expecting. I'm going to select all the files. I can decide what to do with these last ones later on. Select my output location. JPEG. I don't do 100% because I'm going to stack them, so a little bit of noise and artifacts going to go completely away in the stacking process because of the way the stacking works. Fixed scale 100%. Okay. Include everything. Here we are in StarStax. Free download, works really well for this. There's also some add-ons for Photoshop and probably other ways to do this as well. This just happens to be what I do. So we're going to go find our photos. And we just select all the photos we just exported. Once those are loaded in, you'll see we can flip through them if we want here. You can also disable or enable a given photo. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over here. If you pull open the gear menu at the top, you'll get the preferences panel. There's a couple different panels here that do different things. This is the one we're working on now. We're going to go to lighten as the blend mode. The reason we're going to do lighten as the blend mode is because it's fairly quick and it'll give us a good idea of anything we want to deal with, images we want to remove, etc. Gap filling is what we'll use in the end. So we're doing a test right now with light and only. Gap filling is light and only plus some processing to try to make any dimming between the frames less noticeable or gone completely. Okay, so once we do that, we click on this button right here and we can watch it fill in. You can really see the airplanes. The star trail was done in Taylor, which is the northeast side of Austin. Got a lot of traffic coming to and from Bergstrom and also Austin Executive on that side of town. You can, of course, make a choice with what you want to do with that aircraft traffic. also notice a ghost popped in up here from one of the car headlights. Okay, so there was somewhere right around 700, there was this flare out. We're probably going to want to deal with that. So we're almost done though, so I'm just going to let it go. Okay, so let's go up here. Let's see if we can find the frame where that flared out. Okay, so definitely want to lose 704 and 705 because those are both completely not usable frames. Okay, so let's process that again. So you can really see the light and only blending is taking the most overexposed portion of this foreground, which is why we're probably going to blend in a foreground we really like. Okay, so you can see the foggy frames really didn't cause any problem at all. Let's see if I can find that ghost. No, that's not where I want it to be. I want to be 567. First shot. Okay, so there. Okay, so 575 and 567. So I guess what I'll do here is I'm going to show you a little trick. I'm going to go ahead and start Affinity photo. And then I'm going to go pull 567 in. Actually 575. Let me make sure I got the right file number. 575. 3575. Okay, so there's this. So I talked about ways you can deal with things you don't want in the frame. I actually kind of like this. This might be the foreground frame I paint in. It's kind of nice having that come from right in the center of that glow. But this, not crazy about. So, super easy way to deal with this. Big soft brush. Doesn't actually have to be soft. We're going to make it a little harder. We're going to make it completely hard, 100%. Relatively small. Just paint black over that. So now what's happened there, it's like, well, but you just made a big ugly black splotch. Well, we're doing light and only blending, so the background sky is going to come through as are the stars in every other frame. So this won't be there at all. What I've really done here is I've just said don't blend this area of this photo. Okay, save that. So let's go back to StarStax. So now if I go black, so let's go ahead and do 576 as well. Same exact principle. This is a little more obnoxious, so what I'm going to do there is I'm going to do a burn. Wrong tool. There, no, but dodge burn. Where's dodge burn? There it is. Burn down. And this time I'm going to go soft. Try to make that a little bit dark. You can see the outside getting dark. Let's go highlights. And I'm introducing what looks like some artifacts here that you would normally worry a lot about in this scenario. But all I'm really trying to do is make that darker than the other frames. And the stars might be a little dimmer in this case, but they'll be okay. There we go. Okay, so there's that, and save it. Let's go back to StarStax. Okay, pretty ugly. 76, 77, 78. Okay, so we still have some other frames we have to deal with. We're going to use exactly the same method. Before I do that though, I just want to show you, I'm going to process through about where we are on this left side through about 3,577, 78. So you can see what happened with those flares. So there, we just went through those. You notice the flares are not there, and there's no obvious artifact in the sky up here. Let's go ahead and stop that, because there's no reason to go all the way through it. So no flares, no artifact, despite the fact that they had a black blob and some discoloration. And in fact, unless you, I don't even notice any particular breaks up here anywhere. If they are, they're only 1 or 2 trails, so they're not super noticeable. Real quick, I just wanted to show you what I was doing on all of these. Most of these that I'm editing, it's just the foreground. There's nothing else up here. I showed you a couple of the ones with flares. All I actually did was I created a pixel layer. Just kind of drew a line over here. It doesn't have to be super precise. I could have feathered it if I wanted to. Shouldn't actually matter. I created basically this pixel layer that just had this black mask on it. As you can see, it's not precise at all. Copy the mask, and then I can paste that mask, create this mask layer in every single other one that has the same problem. And then what I do is I go back to StarStax, and we stack it. Let's see what that looks like. Now on this one, we should not have any of the crazy. So I left this frame in because I liked that loader. Well, apparently I missed one. That was around 464. Let's just see what else we get. Okay, so I missed one. Go back to Affinity. I think, so I open this up over here. So I've got my Finder window open. I think these two are the ones I missed. So I'm going to select both of those and drag them up here to Infinity and drop them in. Okay, so now I can select my layer, copy it. This one has exactly the same problem. New layer, exactly the same problem. Oops. So there's some question about whether I would like this frame. This is glary, so I'm not going to leave it there. So I'm going to get rid of that. Oops, need to copy that layer again. Good. There we go. Save this, save flattened. This one, it's a little bit of a difficulty. I could leave this streak in here. There's at least one other streak, but because it's broken, it won't look great in this one. So I've got another frame that has a streak. That was not the tool I wanted to use. That was in painting. Grab the black brush. There we go. That's what I wanted to do. Just kind of block that out right there. And that's on this pixel layer. Now I'm saving these flattened, so I can't go back and re-edit them, but the layer is convenient because it lets me copy and paste that mask, and then when I flatten it, it looks fine. Okay, let's minimize that. Get rid of that. Process that again. Okay, so we've now processed this completely out. You can see that this isn't blown out. The foreground, it's a little bright, but it's not terrible. We can do some spot fixing here. This barrel's super bright because it's got day glow tape on it. I could choose to fix that or not, depending on the quality of the image. This is not an image that I'm really that crazy about other than as a demonstration. Probably would take these out in post, so I might go to it in a minute. Airplane trails. Let's talk about airplane trails. Right in the main flight paths, there's just a ton of them. This is an image where I referenced earlier you could do it a couple ways. If I cared a lot more about this image, I would spend some time in Affinity going through frame by frame before stacking and painting out each individual airplane trail. And then when we stacked it, it wouldn't be there. Not sure I had time this morning to go through all that, so I'm probably going to leave that alone for now. So I'm going to change this to gap filling. So now we're going to do our final real processing. So we've got all the frames we want. We don't have any blown out frames. Until this is nice and sharp, it's not overexposed. Maybe you like this exposure, maybe you don't, but it's where we're at now. This is a little bright right here, but we're going to deal with that after the stack instead of trying to find every frame where that's really bright and get rid of it that way. Process. You'll notice how much slower gap filling goes. Okay, so that just completed. And now we can go in and we can adjust the threshold for the gap filling. So low threshold means it's going to kind of blur everything. Large threshold means it'll try to get just the stars. So I usually try to get it to where it's not selecting much that's not star. That's probably pretty good right there. So it's picking based on brightness. Let's try it down just a little bit. Okay, so you see it's picking all the bright sky, but it's not picking a lot of the ground, so I'm not too worried about that. And this area is pretty bright. I'm okay if it blurs that a little bit. So there we go. So let's save this. There we go. So my normal convention is start file -in file .stax. Okay, done. So here we are in Affinity. I've got 2 files loaded. I've got my star trail loaded, my stacked file, and I picked out a random file that had some foreground elements. This grass here is a little better from my point of view than the other. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this using Control-J and rename this one original. And this one we're going to call cleaned. Now before I go too far, I want to get rid of these stakes. They were there in reality, but don't add anything to the photo. If anything, they detract. I'm just going to use Affinity's in-painting brush. And that's right here. And if you don't see that icon, you can pull this down and it's inside this menu. Okay, this does a reasonable job of making the background fill back in. Okay. And that's our small details. You're not going to notice that being the way it is. So that's the first thing. Okay. So there's nothing else I really want to remove from this exactly, but what I do want to do is I want to take this. This is another frame. Control-A, Control-C to copy the entire thing, and Control-V to create a new layer. I'll call it grass. I'll create a mask for it. I'm going to invert that mask. Oops, wrong shortcut key. Okay, so now, if I open this up, I can turn this mask on and off. So I'm going to paint white in. And what painting white in will do, make that pretty big, make this pretty opaque. What painting white in is going to do is basically going to bring in that darker, so I can get rid of that flare. I thought I was going to like that flare, but I'm not crazy about it. I just kind of paint that in, darkens this up just a little bit. Okay, so one side effect here is I'm bringing these back in because they're in that other frame as well, so I'll clean that up in a minute. And I like the bright road. I just am not crazy about the grass being blown out. So I'm going to bring this barrel down just a little bit, and I'm going to make it look like it's got light on that side. And this barrel over here, same thing. These barrels go a little crazy because they're day glow. Okay. Just make those slightly less crazy. Okay, so there's that. So now I'm going to turn this mask off. I'm going to pull these sticks out of here just because they're bleeding through. I blended a little bit of that in, so like the in-painting. It's not a hard thing to do, or I would choose to be careful on the other side. Okay, turn that mask back on. Okay, so there with the grass in, so take that. The grass looks a little better, not quite so blown out. Let's do a little bit more on that. Edge right there, just make that a little dark. Okay. So now the final thing I usually do is I will put a curve adjust. Well, there's lots of things we could do, but in the basic processing, we'll put a curve adjust up here. One thing that tends to happen on these is because they it's a light and blending, you tend to pull the lightest pixels from every frame, which means the whole frame gets a little brighter. So I usually try to start a little underexposed. And then mostly if you notice this histogram right here. So if you notice the histogram right here, this right here is pretty much empty. There's nothing on the left-hand side. So bring put a black point down there. That. Now let's look. I want to look at something real quick here. Not crazy about that flare actually being gone. So let's put that back in just a little bit. Grab this. Make that a little bigger. Let's turn that flow up to 100%. So, yeah, we'll leave it just like that. Always good to save. So this will be a AF photo file, so we can come back and edit it. Don't need this anymore. Don't need to save that change. There we go, and then let's export it. JPEG, 100% quality, good. Dear Affinity, and also every other program. Always go back to either the place where the current file is saved or the last directory I used. There's no reason I should have to reselect this directory. And it's not just Affinity that does this. I don't understand why software developers don't do things like that as a previous software developer. Those are the kind of optimizations that make workflows so much less annoying. I save things all the time in the wrong directory because Affinity will just go back to a directory I worked on 3 files ago. And Premiere will do that, and Illustrator does that, and Capture One does that, and it's quite annoying. Shouldn't have to reselect the directory every time. I've got a place where this is saved, work there. Okay, so there we go. Could certainly use a little more cleanup. I could pull out all of these airplane trails. That's a little bit tedious. I'm not going to do that on this video. But there you go. From shooting it in the field to a completed star trail.